So next we will hear from Josef Penninger. Josef was here last in 2014. He's a genetic engineer. He manipulates genes, and if I understand this correctly, he and his team have discovered the master gene for bone loss on the planet. And his plan is to shut down osteoporosis. What he's told me is he thinks he's got it down to like one shot, which will save 1 million people. Quite extraordinary, and as a sidebar effect, apparently, it also protects against breast cancer. Next thing you know, Josef will be curing death. Josef spent a lot of time in Toronto. He's Austrian by birth. He was finagled back to Austria with an extraordinary offer for an extraordinary lab, but he's a cardiac Canadian.
So, no, thanks for inviting me. I mean, I love physics. So actually, I always wanted to become a physicist and study mathematics. And one day I was sitting in the park in my little town where I grew up with, and this beautiful girl was sitting beside me, and so I decided to become, study medicine. I wanted to figure her out, which I still haven't. And since it's a sessional update, so I wanted to update you more or less on some of the work we have been doing, so where we are, and of course, give you little things about Vienna. So this is actually the first slide I ever showed when I was invited at the ideacity. And so this is the update. So you can guess when this was a long time ago. So my boy just graduated from high school. And being in Vienna, of course, you have to be exposed to Gustav Klimt. And for me, this painting has some fundamental meaning. Because first, in the old tradition of the old Austrian-Hungarian Empire, of course, in the Jewish tradition, there's the tree of life we have lost, because we've been driven out of paradise. So one day, we grow older and die. But through knowledge, through fundamental understanding, how we work, how the world works, what's actually not working if we get sick, and what we can do against it, we might gain back a little bit of life again. So a vision of a world we all grow 90 or 100, and it's my vision. So I still score a goal playing soccer for the Austrian soccer national team for MDs, and actually I do play for them. And I score a goal, and then I drop dead on a heart attack with healthy bones. So this painting has another meaning to me. Oops, I'm too fast. And because in Vienna was, so in the 19th century, the center of the universe for science and medicine. And there was one reason for this. And the reason was the Austrian emperor had decreed that everybody who died had to be autopsied. So this totally revolutionized medicine as we knew it, because all of a sudden it was not just people who were dying, but they actually cut them open and tried to figure out why they died. And there was this guy called Rokitansky, a pathologist, who himself made 60,000 autopsies in his lifetime. And one of his students was actually a guy called Mr. Zuckerkandl, and the wife of Mr. Zuckerkandl ran the biggest art salon of Vienna. And this is where Gustav Klimt went. And actually Gustav Klimt learned about science and actually learned about embryology and female eggs and sperm. And if you actually look very careful, so in the next slide, you can even see in this, in the blue skirt, this is actually an egg cell which divides, even undergoes meiosis. So science basically completely changed the world of art, changed how Gustav Klimt was actually painting. So another student of Mr. Rokitansky was somebody we all know, Sigmund Freud. And another painter in Vienna was heavily influenced by Freud, and this was Egon Schiele. And in the year 1910, Egon Schiele actually painted more than 100 self-portraits, which was unheard of in the history of art. So I think Gustav Klimt didn't paint a single self-portrait. Rembrandt painted maybe 4 or 5 self-portraits. And the reason was, of course, of psychoanalysis. You have to analyze yourself. You have to recognize yourself. And there was a third guy in Vienna at this time, Oskar Kokoschka, and he actually looked straight through the people. So this is this famous painting of the portrait of Auguste Forel, and what they actually can see is his hand is hanging down. So he painted half a year before the guy had a stroke, that the guy actually had a stroke. So he actually directly kind of looked through his soul, and by looking in it, he could actually predict the disease he had down the road. So medicine can actually influence art, and I think we should bring arts and medicine much closer together again in the future. So this is what I do. So I try to figure out how we work, how cells work. So this is a single cell. How do we ever figure out this is working? In our brain, there are 90 billion of them. And this is a single one. And of course, over the years, we learned how to find mutagens and diseases and big data. But at the end of the day, I think at least we reduce it to a problem we can solve. There's this genetics, and the 4 letters of the genetic code is basically the code of life on the entire planet, which are code for plants and viruses and worms, and of course, at the end of the day, humans. So this is what we do. We basically play on the piano of genetics to figure out, what do the genes do, how do they influence, that they can get up in the morning, considering I consist of trillions of cells, millions of them are dying every day, millions of them are born every day. So if we would have to construct a machine like this, which actually works for 90, 100 years, it actually would be a spectacular accomplishment, which of course as nature has done for us. And along the way, also because we heard about large-scale data, we learned some fun facts about the genome. So I was recently in Cambridge in the UK. So they have these beautiful little museums. So in the year 1990, we had technologies which would have taken us 2,000 years to read one human genome, which is around 3 billion letters. So now we can do this in an afternoon. This, of course, has totally revolutionized what we can do, what we can understand in evolution, reading basically disease genomes of people who have cancer, rare diseases all over the planet. And just some little fun facts. So if you take me, grind me up, take all the DNA which comes out of this body now standing in front of you, we could actually get 10,000 times to the moon and back. So this is the length of all our DNA in our cells. And the other little fact is, you would actually find that in this body which stands in front of you, there's only 10% human DNA. So the rest are bacteria and viruses and fungi which live with us. So at the end of the day, probably the bacteria are the intelligent beings on this planet. They learn to live with us. So we worry about things, we feed them, we're running around, we go to good restaurants. And probably they also invented sex so they can go on holiday sometimes to somebody else. And another little fact is that only 2% of the genome we have actually code for proteins. So what you just heard on the universe, it's actually what we have been doing in biology. We were only studying 2% of the universe. So the rest is this dark matter we still have to figure out. So there's a lot of things to do. So a little updates what we have been doing the last years. So we actually some years ago broke one paradigm of biology. So we created a stem cell, and just a human stem cell was actually just published a month ago in Nature. We created the first stem cell, which has a halved set of chromosomes. So a cell like this should actually not live on this planet. The reason why we do this is because having only one set of chromosomes allow us to play on the piano of evolution and basically make millions of mutations in an afternoon. So we can now basically recreate on the whole genome level evolution in an afternoon by changing every gene we want and then ask the question, what do these genes actually do? So this is, of course, based on lots of technology which came together, that we can grow stem cells, that there's sequencing, that you can actually read out the mutations again, that we have jumping genes like Sleeping Beauty, HIV-based viruses we can use to actually mutagenize genomes. This new technology, which is called CRISPR, which is actually revolutionizing at the moment genetics, which came out actually from bacteria, how bacterial genomes defend themselves. So you never know where you actually have to go to study. So all our mutations are repairable, barcoded like in a supermarket. So we make mutations. Since it's a single genome, every mutation we make is kaput. We make 50 million of them in one go to the sequencing machine and try to figure out how it works. So in Europe, we have now started a big project on essential genes for virus infections. And the reason why the European Union is actually giving us the money to do this is because of climate change. So the climate changes, and actually what comes with it is certain insects, certain mosquitoes all of a sudden learn to live in Europe again. And they bring diseases and they bring viruses we have never seen before. So basically the idea is that we use our technologies to figure out how these viruses work, because if they really hit us, we more or less can do something against it. So we actually started to work on Zika virus, which of course has been in the news recently. We work on Ebola. Marburg is even worse than Ebola, so there's some nasty viruses around the high security lab, so don't worry, I don't have them in my pocket here. And the viruses which actually kill more people than Ebola, nobody talks about, which are endemic in some regions, in some tourist regions, for instance. And we thought we have a little fun and work also on the virus which causes the common cold we all have. And of course, there's basically nothing one can do about it. So this is how it works. We take our cells, halved genome, make 50 million mutations, give the virus, we kill the cells, we mutate, and of course we find a gene which is essential for the virus to kill. Then the cells live, we go to the sequencing machine, read it out, and here it is. So we actually found an essential pathway for the common cold virus to kill the cells. And the beauty of this is there's actually medicine out there most of us already taking, which can kill it. So at least in part, with these new technologies we think we have figured out how the common cold virus works. Of course, this is cell biology. Now we of course test it in real humans. So this we also did in Vienna. So we have this place, we created a playground of great minds, of little children like me who play, make the next sandcastle, have totally crazy ideas. And one of the crazy ideas of my colleague Jürgen Knoblich was this one, to actually make a human brain out of a stem cell. And everybody thought he's totally nuts. And so this is actually the image of the first human brain created from a stem cell. So we can even take an 80-year-old person, reprogram cells back to stem cells, and you can make a little human brain out of it. And this technology has now exploded, because basically every neurobiologist is using this, because they want to model autism, they want to model schizophrenia, they want to model epilepsy, they're modeling glioblastoma. There are no drugs out there. The worst brain cancer you can imagine. All of a sudden, with these little crazy ideas in the little lab in the center of Europe, has opened, of course, now doors where one can actually play and find totally new pathways and maybe new medicines for diseases. So we got inspired by this, and So I actually show you the first human blood vessels we grow. So we have not published this yet. So my student is actually doing this. So we can take a human stem cell and make perfect human blood vessels with the lining outside and inside and how they look. And so why would we do this? So for instance, diabetes. It's predicted that in 5 years or so, there will be 400 million people on the planet with diabetes. And one of the worst things is actually happening, of course, with other things which happen to diabetics, is the blood vessels change. So normally they have this, this lumen where the blood flows through the lining of it, and there's a lining outside, and this lining actually gets from here to this. I'm exaggerating, obviously. And so you can imagine this actually gives the symptoms of diabetes. This is no oxygen comes through, the blood cells cannot go through the blood vessels anymore. That's the reason why diabetic get strokes, get blind, lose their legs and limbs, or get wounds which don't heal because the blood vessels don't work. So we thought this is actually cool. Maybe we can model diabetic changes in blood vessels. So this is it. This is normal blood vessels, and we have some magic mix, and actually they change totally. So all the drugs which are on the market, none of them works, but we actually found a medicine which could possibly help. So that's why we do this, to actually figure out disease, model human disease conditions, and then find possibly new medicines to make it a little better. And this is my little third update, as Moses already mentioned. And this was what I also showed. It's actually the first time I talked at ideacity. So at that time, we had made a mouse mutant. So this is what I do, genetic engineering. We do this since 20 years, make mutant mice from stem cells and ask the question what they're doing. And we hit the gene, which now called rank ligand, but it could have any other name. And when we mutate this gene, these animals did not have a single bone-eating osteoclast anymore. So a healthy bone is basically a cell which adds new bone and a cell which eats the bone away. And the balance between these two cell types gives us healthy bones. And actually 90% of diseases associated with bone loss is because the bone-eating cells, or osteoclasts, eat too much bone. So we basically hit the jackpot finding the essential gene. And this actually turns out in every species in this world which has bone, the essential gene which takes a cell, you become a bone-eating cell. And because we have this essential gene, it's like a funnel. You can have 100 reasons of bone loss, space travel, being sick in the hospital, can't get up, old age, osteoporosis, and all of them have to go through the funnel. So understanding this fundamental principle, how bone works or how it's built, medicine has been developed. It's now a $3 billion industry, so I actually get the glory and somebody else get the money, and I think this is actually perfectly cool, because at the end, who cares if we can help somebody, happy if some other get rich on it. And this medicine has actually now been approved for osteoporosis, 2 injections per year. So far, it's still the best molecule on the planet, as far as I understand, to block bone loss. So 2 times a year, a shot under the skin. Just to remind you, osteoporosis is one of the most frequent causes of death in old age. We all will get it, because this is how our normal physiology is set up. So all people walking, falling, getting to the hospital, contract pneumonia, can't get out of the hospital anymore. This medicine has been approved for metastasis to the bones. There's more than 1 million people every year who have cancer, where the tumor metastasizes to the bones. In many cases, eats the bone away, since we can block bone loss. These people who have metastasis, they don't break their bones anymore, or patients with prostate tumors, for instance. This was a study recently published, a really nasty tumor which grows out of the limbs, out of the bones. The only therapy so far which actually worked was amputation. So it turns out this tumor is totally hooked on the principle we found. Nearly every patient responds. So a tumor which was untreatable besides surgery become all of a sudden more or less healable. It works for osteosarcoma, but a proper clinical study needs to be done. And along the way, we also figured out how the system is regulated by sex hormones, by bone loss occurs more in females because sex hormones regulate this. And the reason why they do is because the main function of this protein encoded by the gene is that sex hormones talk to the breast and tell the breast cells to grow and form a lactating mammary gland in pregnancy. And this is why women, when they're pregnant, actually lose their bones, so 1 tooth per pregnancy, because they're sucking out the calcium from the bone to give it to the babies. And this, of course, took us straight into breast cancer. Because that's the molecular principle in basically every mammal, as far as we understand in this world, how sex hormones drive the breast cells to grow. And so we have been working on this, and just recently a clinical study was actually published, and this was spectacular because, if you go to Wikipedia, 1 in 7, 1 in 8 women in North America will be faced with the diagnosis of breast cancer. 80% of them have hormonal-dependent breast cancer, and they get this medicine called tamoxifen, which blocks hormones, but actually 10% of them have broken bones within 3 years. So they actually started giving this medicine. The clinical study had to be terminated because of ethical reasons. It worked so well that it was unethical to not give it. And one of the benefits was actually the women who had this, had a tumor, they got 17% of them got less reawakening of the metastasis. So in essence, we're talking about So in essence, we talk about hundreds, thousands of women who don't have to go to the hospital. And then what I really want to do is prevention of breast cancer. It never happens. Since this is the principle of sex hormones drive the cell into telling them to grow, we actually, for the last 6 years, we just published it 2 weeks ago, set up a model where mutation in breast cancer 1 gene, just because a mutation Angelina Jolie had, and unfortunately many others, and it massively enhances the risk of developing breast cancer. So we have mouse models where this drives the breast tumors, and then we ask the question, if this is the fundamental principle, how sex hormones talk to the stem cells, even under these conditions of very high risk of breast cancer. So what's happening, and this is what's happening. We can nearly completely wipe out in this experimental model, even under conditions of mutations of BRCA1, the breast cancer occurs. So this is what I want to do, and we are setting up now a clinical trial with 3,000 women who are healthy, who are young, carry these mutations. They have around 85% chance in the lifetime to develop breast cancer. And the trial in 5-6 years, I can tell you, because we're just starting it, we just need to get it financed. The trial is simple, no cancer, or they do get cancer. And this is my other tree of life to, this is my own cloning effort. And coming back from Gustav Klimt, figuring out fundamental mechanisms of life. And of course, figuring out how can we grow trees from little babies to young adults. And of course, little trees, which I hope, which has 40 different types of blooms. So thanks for listening.